Thanks everybody for joining us this evening. We're just allowing some more participants to join. The numbers are creeping up, and then we will make a start. Okay, super. We will make a start. I'll hand you over to Sarah Hill, CEO of IDAS.
Thanks, Carmel. Good evening, everyone. My name's Sarah Hill, and as Carmel said, I'm CEO of the Specialist Domestic Abuse Charity IDAS. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all, and also to say a big thank you to the candidates who've joined us for the hustings this evening. As we all know, Philip Allett recently resigned his position following comments about the murder of Sarah Everard. And what his comments did was shone a light on the misogyny and victim blaming that underpin and help facilitate abuse of women, both on the streets and in our own homes. It also brought our county to the attention of the local and national press. So North Yorkshire is a beautiful county and one of the safest in England. And there's been much done over the last few years to improve support for victims, to help ensure that there is not a postcode lottery for services, and to make it easier for support to reach those in the most isolated rural locations. However, with falling prosecution rates nationally for both sexual violence and domestic abuse, many hundreds of survivors across the county do not feel safe. Additionally, young women who work with me at IDAS tell me that they don't feel safe walking home or getting the bus late at night. So there is more work to do. We know that tackling violence against women and girls, improving prosecution rates, and implementing early intervention programmes are, of course, national imperatives. But local commissioners have the power to make decisions, including decisions about our blue light services and commissions to support victims. The next Police and Crime Commissioner will be well placed to make some of the changes needed to help local women feel safe at home and on the streets. And so tonight, I hope all the candidates will set out their plans in relation to this area of work. This, of course, is not just a hustings to focus on domestic abuse, harassment and sexual violence. And I'm sure the candidates will be asked about many of the challenging issues that impact us all: policing budgets, rural crime, the nighttime economy, and crimes against the most vulnerable communities. So if you do have any questions, please do post these in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to put them to the candidates if we have time towards the end. Finally, I can think of no better person to chair this evening's hustings than Julia Mulligan, who was, of course, herself the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner in North Yorkshire for 9 years, and who is still very much involved in work to support victims and survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence. So I will leave you in Julia's hands to introduce all of the candidates and take us through the rest of the evening. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And thank you. This was Sarah's idea and Carmel's idea. Thank you very much for suggesting this. So I'm Julia Mulligan, Chair of Trustees for IDAS. I'd like to, if I may, ask each of the candidates to introduce themselves. We're going to go in alphabetical order by Christian name. So Emma, if you would like to start, please. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, my name's Emma Scott-Spivey and I'm the candidate for the Labour Party.
Thank you. Dr. Hannah?
Hi, I'm Hannah Barron-Brown and I'm the candidate for the Women's Equality Party.
Thank you, Hannah. James?
Good evening, I'm James Barker and I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate.
Thank you, James. Keith?
Good evening, Keith Tordoff MBE. I am independent candidate.
And finally, Zoe.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Zoe Metcalfe and I'm the Conservative candidate.
Thank you very much, everybody. Now, just for those who are watching, our audience, firstly, thank you very much for coming tonight. We very much hope you find it interesting, informative, and gives you helps you perhaps decide who you might want to cast your vote for on Thursday. The format is very simple. Each of the candidates are going to do a 1-minute pitch, if you like, for what they would like to focus on around violence against women and girls, and then there'll be a follow-up question. We'll then open up the questions to the floor via Carmel, who will pose the questions or ask individuals who want to pose their own questions to ask their questions of the candidate. I hope that we might get a bit of a debate going. That would be interesting. And at the end of the hustings, each of the candidates will be given 30 seconds to summarise their positions. We will hope to be concluded by about 7 o'clock. One of the candidates does need to leave at 7 o'clock, so we will try and facilitate that. So first of all, if I could ask Emma then, please, to start with your 1 minute.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. So I joined the ambulance service in 2017. I joined hoping that I would be able to make a profound difference, and soon became very aware of the deeply ingrained and in many cases institutional problems that face not only the ambulance service but also the police and the fire service as well. I myself am a survivor of sexual assault, so I lived a lot of years with quite severe PTSD to the point where I was afraid to go out past dusk hours. So lived my life using my very close and supportive friends and family as a crutch, essentially. And I don't want to ever have to think that my younger sister will have to go through that. My parents are police officers, so the emergency services is deeply ingrained in all aspects of my life. But I think that this election has to be about restoring trust and rebuilding the front line, and women's and girls' safety is a pivotal issue, not least because of how this by-election came about.
Thank you, Emma. Can I just ask them, why do you want to do the job?
So, like I said, I joined the ambulance service in 2017, thinking I could sort of change the world one patient at a time, and soon became aware that it was going to be a bigger legacy that needed to be left behind in order to leave something, a palpable change. My parents both served 30 years in the police and came away from the police in their retirement, and in light of what happened to Sarah Everard, they asked me if they'd actually made a difference at all. Now, of course they did, and they've made a profound difference in a lot of individuals' lives, but they were devastated that what they hadn't left behind was a cohesive community in which they felt that their daughters could walk at night safely. That isn't what they left behind, and that's what I'd like to leave behind for my sister.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I speak then? Hannah, could you please say your 1 minute?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, thank you for putting on this event. It's such an important issue. I'm really delighted we've managed to get all the candidates together for this. So I'm Dr. Hannah Barron-Brown. I'm a GP registrar living just outside Selby. I'm one of the deputy leaders of the Women's Equality Party, and I'm completely unapologetic about my priority for this election, which is to make ending violence against women and girls the top political and policing priority in North Yorkshire. And I'm unapologetic about that because I'm outraged, heartbroken and terrified at the scale of gender-based violence in our county right now. I believe that in order to do this, we need to root out misogyny in the police force. We need to have an independent inquiry into that. But I'm also very proud to have a series of very tangible, set out plans on how I'm going to make women and girls safer in North Yorkshire. So I really hope that as we discuss more tonight, we can learn about what each of the candidates plan to do, because this is such a massive issue and one that I think has been woefully neglected far too long on a national level.
Okay, so you're going to have plenty of time to talk about your approach to violence against women and girls, but there are a lot of other issues in North Yorkshire. You know, what else do you think are top of the agenda?
So my manifesto, all of the policy points you see on it are focusing around ending violence against women and girls, but I think that's partly because they have a very clear link into a lot of other areas. So if you want to talk about county lines gangs, we can talk about that primarily we can look at the fact that actually it's more and more affecting young women who are being pulled into sexual violence. And actually by tackling it, by bringing in violence reduction units, that's going to be key. I've been out and I've spoken to students who tell me they're worried about spiking. And we've heard that on the local news today. We need to start approaching these crimes as we need to stop telling people to keep themselves safe, and we need to start putting things in place to actually empower them to do so. So I think every element of...
I think you've answered the question. Thank you. Okay. Could we go on to James, please?
Good evening, and echo Hannah's words about putting this on. It's a very, very important subject. I too have seen violence against women and girls on my tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, where women are treated very much as second-class citizens, and that does strike a chord. Having two sisters myself and a mother, violence against women has got to stop. Full stop. Should I be elected, I want to regain the trust that the PFCC office has lost with these groups. I want to get out. I want to listen to them and understand where we're not as good as we could be, how we can be better. So to me, it's talking to these groups. More importantly, it's listening to these groups. Like I said, there's no moratorium on good ideas. Should I be elected? It is high up there on it's priority number one. Everyone has the right to go about their lives safely, lawfully, free from fear. And whatever we can do to enhance that has got to be the right thing. And I think morally, it has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So you talked there a lot about a lot of talking. What are you actually going to do?
Well, let's see what's already out there. I know South Yorkshire Police Constabulary have got a really good system. We've got the White Rose Group. I'm no technical expert in this area, so let's listen to it. Let's talk to groups like IDAS and others like yourself to find out. Let's listen to their solutions. Let's commission study into and what we could do better. Let's start spending money on supporting these groups. Let's listen to these groups and let's act on their concerns.
Thank you, James. Keith, if you'd like to put your points now, please.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Keith Todd MBE. I'm the only independent candidate in this contest, self-funding my campaign. All the other candidates are from political parties. I don't believe there's any place for this role for politicians or people from political parties. It should be an independent role as it was set up in 2012 to be. Somebody to act as the bridge between the community and the police service themselves. I come with a background of having been a police officer for over 20 years. I was actually the first officer on the scene of 2 of Peter Sutcliffe's murders, dealt with numerous rape victims as a detective, and also domestic abuse situations, taking women to refuges in the early hours of the morning. So I've come with bags of experience. I've also been a bank fraud investigator, where I've dealt with budgets involving millions of pounds. I've also been a businessman. I'm a community volunteer leader. So in that, I've brought people together, whether it be churches, the schools, elderly people, young people, to work on projects achieving national acclaim for them, hence the reason I was awarded the MBE in 2018. I believe I've got the full skill sets for this role. I come with a 3-point plan ready to roll from Monday, the Monday after the election, ready to go ahead with it. And mine are clearly the protecting the vulnerable, safer streets for all. And in that, of course, priority, I'm sure it's every candidate's priority, it must be, which is violence against women and girls. And I've got plans for that, but I've also got plans to make everybody feel safer in North Yorkshire, whether it is safer or otherwise, make it feel safer, and a green agenda, which I want to deliver on. And I'm ready, I'm really passionate, I care, and that's why I've also said that £20,000 of salary each year will go to good causes.
You're running out of your minute.
Finished.
Okay, super. Okay, so Keith, you talked there about quite a lot of general things. I want to know what you're going to do about violence against women and girls.
Absolutely. I think that it's endemic proportions. I think it's been allowed to get out of hand. And unfortunately, we've had 2 conservative PFCCs since 2012. They haven't delivered in relation to that. I would bring into place a national strategy, a bit like the anti-terrorism, which is prevent, to basically get all the agencies, all the partners, academic group, police, etc., to deliver down one pathway so that we actually follow the evidence and get a lot more prosecutions for rape. This whole rape culture has to change, where people think it's something that you see on TV. And basically deliver on something instead of lots of talking, but by working with all these agencies. And it's got to become on the same basis now as violence against women and girls as terrorism. And it's as simple as that. And it can be delivered from Monday, the day after the election.
Thank you. And finally, Zoe, if you'd like to do your piece as well, please.
Hey, well, thank you very much. So I'm passionate to make a difference to my community. I want to deliver better support for vulnerable groups. Being a district and a county councillor, I'm already very aware of the issues that the county face already, and I'm part of that decision-making process. Alongside this, I run my own children's mental health charity, and I'm really passionate about mental health. So those are the things that really interest me, and I'd want to put forward in this role.
So how do you think your knowledge of mental health intersects with policing?
Well, for starters, nationally, 1 in every 3 police call-outs are for mental health issues. So I think having a personal interest in this really has opened my eyes to how agencies collaborate or don't collaborate and could work better together.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've done the 1 minute, you've done your 1 minute pitches. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to questions from the audience. If you could try and keep your answers to the point and brief, I'd appreciate it, because as I said, we do have quite a lot of questions. I'm going to hand over to Carmel. Carmel, do you want to pose the first, or find us the first question?
Thank you. So this is Paul from York St John University, who says traditionally universities work on crime that has been about advising students on how to avoid being a victim of crime. But what more could be done by the police, both on prevention and enforcement, to make students' lives safer?
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go to Emma first. Emma.
Thank you. And yeah, it's an interesting point, particularly in like the spiking concerns recently. What I've heard a lot of is, oh, if we give students litmus strips to test their own drinks, then they can keep themselves safer. Now, for me, it's not about policing the behaviours of victims, because then we open up a steep and slippery slope to victim blaming. Well, why didn't you test your own drink, and how many drinks did you have before you thought you might test the next one? So actually, I think we do continue down the road that has already been demonstrated of victim blaming. If we become too caught up in the how do we prevent ourselves from becoming victims, the police exists or should exist to keep us safe and to stop us from having to take the law quite literally into our own hands. I think we need to do quite a lot of work with licensed premises in order to keep their patrons safe. Yeah, I think we need to sort of run educational business sort of schemes whereby bars and pubs and clubs know how they can assist the police in keeping their patrons safe.
Thank you. Keith, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I've already signed the pledge with the University at York to say that I will go with the 5 pledges that the students actually want. I believe that I can certainly look at things like, are the police using enough of Clare's Law, where people can actually find out about the background of potentially somebody that are either going into a relationship or already in one, have they got a history of domestic violence? Are the police in North Yorkshire using enough domestic violence protection notices and domestic violence protection orders? We need to be looking at that. And we need to specialise in this area. We need police officers to be specialised. We know that the North Yorkshire Police got rid of the PVP office, which was the protection and violence for obviously victims. And we need to reintroduce specialist department officers who understand it, because we can't have police 1 minute dealing with a road accident or dealing with a pub fight and then going to deal with somebody who's complaining about domestic abuse or a sexual assault.
I think the question was about students.
Well, it applies, Julia, to students. Basically, all these are relevant to how the police actually deal with these incidents when it comes to it. And students, in relation to drinking, we work with the licensees. Some licensees, such as in Bridlington, are already introducing where they hand out a foiled cap for the drinks to stop them being spiked. We've got the ban system, which isn't being used, where we can give out bans at the doors of licensed premises, which can test whether drinks have been spiked during the course of the evening. A lot of practical applications, and certainly police officers liaising with the students, going into the universities all the time, liaising with the students and seeing what their concerns and problems are, working with them. So lots of practical initiatives. But the important thing is that the police, when they're investigating these situations, have time to do it.
Okay, Emma wants to come back in.
There was a lot of talk of practical initiatives then, which is something that I touched on briefly. And I think in relation to the question, the problem is that we're giving students what we would call practical initiatives, but ultimately that puts the onus on them to keep themselves safe. And we should be thinking about ways in which we can reassure students that they are being kept safe.
Thanks, Emma. Hannah.
Thank you. I get quite frustrated when I hear about testing drinks and putting foil caps on things. We've been telling people to do this for about 20 years now, and now they're just injecting people. So that does not work. We've heard about that on the local news today. What we need to do is actually work with license holders. We need to work with students as well. When I've been speaking to students, they've said they don't feel they have a relationship with the police. They don't feel they can come forward. So I've already pledged I will go into the university every quarter myself to build relationships with students, and I will ensure that a PCSO is going in every week to ensure that they have a drop-in service where they can ask questions, where they can find out what's going on, whether or not they can report X, Y, and Z. We need to build those relationships and centre the experience of survivors, and that's what we're not doing properly at the moment. You're muted, Julia, sorry.
Okay, thank you. There's people muting me and unmuting me, so I'm getting confused. So I'm going to bring Zoe in, and then I'm going to bring in a couple of questions from the Q&A, because there's some great questions in the Q&A. Zoe.
Yeah, so I just want to agree that actually prevention is more important. I was at York Uni last week, and I was talking to some university students, and really it's about working with the nightclubs and the licensees to have conversations with them, the police, and to work in collaboration together. I think it's absolutely right that those conversations are had, and the onus isn't on the students to keep themselves safe. It's about the whole of the nighttime economy, community, keeping each other safe. So that's really important. I think that there needs to be better pathways to report, especially along the lines of, you know, if students are walking home and there's a couple of street lights out, actually makes it really uncomfortable and worrying to walk home on their own or with their friend. It's about understanding how we can sort that out and how they can report those street lights being out. One thing I'd like to do is set up a students commission, and that came to me really from the conversations last week, that we have a massive student demographic in North Yorkshire, and I think it's really important that their voice is heard.
Thank you, Zoe. James, I'm going to bring you in, but I'm going to just pose this question to you, if I may. With respect to the male candidates here, and this is from a man who's asked the question, how can they possibly be seen to empathise with VAUG, particularly in the light of the last PFCC's gunshot incident to the foot? James.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard. But, you know, I was brought up fairly sort of an old-fashioned family where, you know, violence against women, and you never hit women full stop. There is never an excuse for that. And that comes from education at a very early age. And that was going to come back to my last point, but let's start educating people from a very early age about what is acceptable behaviours in society. Once you can change that society, that you think it's okay for violence against women, for whatever reason, we're on a path that's going to hopefully take us in the right direction. But it's got to be backed up by robust protocols, you know, and taking, you know, violence against women very, very seriously, and recorded as a hate crime against misogyny. You know, it's all these sort of bits and pieces that we can do. It's really hard, though, for a guy to stand up in front of a group of ladies and just say, look, you know, this is wrong on so many counts. But like I said, I've got two sisters and I've got a mother. I'd be awfully disappointed if, you know, and quite cross if violence was affected against either of them.
Thank you, James. Carmel, I think we'll close that question now. Carmel, could you ask the next question, please?
Yes, I wonder if Hannah from our audience is available to ask her question. I will just see if she's actually been able to attend. It doesn't look like she's able to ask the question herself, so I'll ask it on her behalf. So Hannah asks, how will you ensure the voices of people with lived experiences are listened to and actively included in your work?
Thank you very much. Keith, I saw you had your hand up. Why don't you start with that question?
Well, I obviously wanted to answer in relation to the fact that, you know, obviously I'm one of 2 male candidates.
No, that's not the question that you've been asked, Keith.
No, I think it's important to say, though, that I understand, because having been in a situation, most probably the only person who's actually dealt with victims of violence against women and girls, particularly murder, and had to do that, basically dealing with the families, it still is a memory for me. So I think it's important that that is covered from the last question, which I felt I should have been given an opportunity to come back on. Okay, well, you've come back on it now. I would say that we do have a survivor amongst the candidates. So that's an interesting point. So you're not the only person. So can you answer the question that was posed, that Carmel posed to you, please? Can you just repeat the question if you don't mind? Thank you.
Carmel, could you do that, please?
Absolutely, yes. So how will you ensure the voices of people with lived experience are listened to and actively included in your work?
Because the whole role of the Police Fire Crime Commissioner's Office should be about listening to people and basically then fighting, working for them to actually deliver change. So we can only do that by actually spending time with them. And I know from speaking in the last couple of weeks to people who've actually gone through domestic abuse, that they don't necessarily feel that some of the parts have gone very well. And IDAS do fantastic work in this area, as do Kyra from York. And I'm aware of that, but certainly the people I've spoken to feel that parts of the whole process don't support them, break down, and the voices aren't heard. So clearly we need to start changing the processes, and that's what I said at the start. We need a strategic approach to this, and that is what I would deliver, so that actually the victims come first and we deal with that and make sure that they feel they've had everything done that they could have to help them through what the trauma that they've gone through.
All right, thank you. Emma, I see you got your hand up. I'm going to bring Hannah in because she's had less of a chance to talk. So Hannah.
Thank you. So the voice of the survivors should frankly be front and centre of everything. I'm a GP. I work with survivors every single day of my clinical career, and I know how important their experiences are. As such, one of my big policies is that I'm going to ensure we put proper funding into rape and domestic abuse scrutiny panels. At the moment, these exist. They're not properly funded. They're not properly resourced, and lessons are not being learned from them. And survivors need to be in those conversations, asking why so many cases aren't making it to prosecution, and also forming really close links with organisations. So as commissioner, you have a number of powers. Yes, you can commission services, and that's key, making sure that there are culturally appropriate services that work with minoritised women, disabled women, LGBTQ women, but also ensuring that we are bringing in the voices in every possible context. And that means ensuring that there's training for agencies that work with these groups, ensuring that we're building links with different organisations, but also just making sure that I have contact with them and going out and speaking to people, because I think so often it feels like the PFCC is off in an office somewhere, and actually we need to be out meeting people and meeting survivors and engaging with them front and centre.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. I'm going to bring James in now, if I may. James.
Yeah, certainly. Can you repeat that question again? That was great. I spent most of my time concentrating on Hannah's answer, which I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
One of the big strong things I said is listen, listen, and listen, not
yes,
talk.
But you've got to act as well. So how would you ensure the voices of people with lived experience are listened to and included in your work?
Well, that comes back to, echo Hannah's sentiments. Let's commission the reports. Let's look at what's happening. Let's try and build a picture. And then you can commission the correct service that they need, and not just any service. But let's not just forget, we're talking about sort of domestic violence here. There are also men that it affects. So it's across the whole spectrum of society. So we need to take minorities into account as well. And it comes back to listen, act.
Thank you, James. Are you aware of the research that's gone into commissioning services in North Yorkshire? Because there's a significant amount of research that has been done, and one might suggest we need more action. What do you think?
So are you posing that to me?
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I haven't seen all the research, so it's not fair to comment. But is it the right research? And if so, let's take a view on it, and then commit. Let's look at it. You know, I don't want to throw good money after bad. If there's something better out there, likewise, are we reinventing the wheel, or can we just make it better? And that's something as a commissioner I would be looking at. Okay,
thank you. Zoe, could you come in now, please?
Thank you. I mean, yes, there's been a lot of talk of listening, and yes, we need to do that. It needs to be the forefront of our engagement with these victim and survivors groups. And James is quite right. It's men and women too. We need to be out there visibly talking to these groups, all groups, and engaging with them. And then we need to be taking their comments and feedback and channeling it into our crime police plan, which is really important. And that's where you get the action. Thank you.
Thank you. Emma, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm tentative about anybody saying that they understand anything that they haven't experienced. I think that goes for all things, not just in this case domestic abuse and sexual violence. It also stands for hate crimes against LGBTQ plus communities and hate crimes against people who are disabled. I think unless you have actually physically lived an experience, you cannot say that you understand. Yes, we can absolutely try to empathise and listen, although we have done an awful lot of listening, not an awful lot of acting. But I think it's a dangerous route to go down, in which we suggest that we understand experiences that we have not lived. We might see things on a daily basis that reflect the impacts, but actually I'm not entirely sure how somebody who has not experienced those things can say wholeheartedly that they understand the impacts.
Thank you, Emma. Carmel, should we go to the next question, please?
Yeah, I'm going to invite Anna to ask her question. She's put it in the Q&A, but she also submitted it to us earlier as well. So I'm just going to allow her to speak.
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes? We can hear you. Yeah,
we can hear you.
Anna.
I'm on the Survivor Advisory Board, part of IDAS. So obviously I've lived domestic abuse, plus actually rape and spiking. But my question is sort of at the other end of abuse. I wondered what you could possibly offer to make women who have been abused feel safer during the court process.
Thank you. Hannah, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to start on this one? Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your question. So one of my big areas is that I'm going to push for more funding for independent domestic abuse, domestic violence and sexual violence advocates who can support people through the process. I know this is something that IDAS do, and I think it's absolutely vital, because we know so often when we speak to victims and survivors, the process of reporting, the process of investigation is in itself re-traumatizing, and that should never be the case, because it stops people coming forward, and that's what contributes to such low conviction rates. So we need to have that support in place, and we need to make sure that it's culturally appropriate, that people are trained appropriately to work with people from an intersection of society, from people from different racial and minoritized groups, for people who are LGBTQ and disabled, and ensuring that there are refuge spaces. We know that, for example, women from migrant backgrounds who have no recourse to public funds often struggle to get themselves into refuge spaces, which means that they cannot leave. And that's a problem for many groups, but particularly for those. So I think we need to kind of look at the whole survivor journey, but trying to get that additional funding for IDVAs and ISVAs is going to be absolutely key for the process.
Thank you, Hannah. Emma.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that Hannah's just said. I think that the main thing for me is that we have to take a trauma-informed and victim-centred approach. There is no other crime that is quite sort of treated as domestic abuse and sexual violence. In my opinion, they are one of the last taboos. There is no other crime in which, when someone tells you that they are a victim, the word alleged is put in front of that word. If somebody tells you that the house has been burgled, you don't call them an alleged victim of burglary. And speaking from personal experience, a lot of people that I speak to as well, the court case sort of process in itself is daunting because of the stories that we've heard as women, as survivors, not just women, but survivors in whole, where victims end up feeling like they themselves are on trial, and that's something that is inherently broken. And actually, we will never know the full gravity of the situation if we can't collect the data, because survivors aren't coming forward in the first place to report the crimes against them because they're afraid of what will happen if they do.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to bring Keith in now. Keith?
Thank you, Julia. I think that I go back to where I started really, which is we need a specialist command structure in place, which North Yorkshire used to have the PVP section. So it's a case of specialist officers working with people from IDAS and other organisations to support the victims, so that they're specialising in that. They want to be trained to the same level as the counter-terrorism officers, so that they're actually specifically used to dealing with victims of domestic abuse and sexual offences. Until we get that, and we've got to return to that, we've got officers who can't spend the time on it because they're dealing with that many other things. So it's the way that it's structured, and basically, I say, unfortunately, for whatever reason, through the PFCC's office, through North Yorkshire Police, the unit that was there has gone away. It's been withdrawn. Presumably that's due to austerity cuts from the Conservative government implemented through the office of the PFCC.
Okay, so then let's bring Zoe in to answer that question, given she's the Conservative candidate.
Thank you. Well, for me, all the comments being made are absolutely right. It's about funding more advocates. It's about being able to support those victims through the process. It's about speeding up the court process. Quite often it takes far too long. And I think it must take a tremendous amount of courage to be able to report domestic abuse. And these survivors and victims need all the support they can get to go through the process.
But Zoe, how do you answer Keith's challenge there around austerity and budget cuts?
Well, I would say that, the Conservative government have given additional money to create more policing on our streets, and North Yorkshire have seen 114 additional police officers, men and women, on our streets. And that's the real life reality of this, which is really, really good. We're going to get another 50, hopefully, to come to us. And I think that shows the commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. James, you want to come in?
Sorry. Yeah, it's just on Zoe's point. If we're getting another 50 police officers coming to us, it's not actually addressing the shortfall of walking out the door at the same time. So, we need to stop the rot. Retention is so much better than recruitment.
James, could you tell me the evidence that you base that assertion on?
Having spoken to the Unison rep, having spoken to police officers on the street.
So your assertion is that more officers are leaving North Yorkshire Police than are joining?
Well, it's going to take a while to get those 50 officers onto the street. And when you look at England, we are England's largest county. How far are 50 officers going to go? And actually, I can see Keith waving his hand. I think he's got some points to make as well.
I think it's 200 officers, but anyway. So I'm going to move on now, if I may. There's an interesting point in the chat here, which I think I'll bring in. So this is from Mr. Long. He draws the connection between licensed firearms holders and domestic violence. We've got a big rural isolated population here. One of the highest levels of firearms licensing in the country. What will candidates be doing to ensure the highest standards of firearms licensing in North Yorkshire? And I'm going to start that with Keith. And please answer this question, Keith, not the previous one.
maybe because you don't want me to answer it, Julia, but that's no problem at all. Anyway, moving swiftly on, there already is in place for domestic abuse, violence offences that the firearms are taken off people. So that's the first thing I should say. In relation to firearms, as an ex-firearms officer who did personal protection for prime ministers and home secretaries, I understand about firearms, but I'll say there is legislation in place. Clearly, people need proper vetting. The vetting could certainly be improved, and we need to look at whether we start looking at social media accounts in relation to people who are applying for firearms to check and see what kind of comments, kind of things are actually involved in, because are they appropriate that they should have a firearm? So, and I say, in relation to the last one, I will just drop in, Julia, that retention is not the same by a long stretch of the imagination for police officers.
Okay, so Keith, we've got the terrible Plymouth shooting, which was a firearms licensing issue. How could you make sure that that doesn't happen in North Yorkshire?
Well, he was a misogynist for a start off, because he'd posted on social media, and that was well known. And the police were aware of that case. So why didn't they? I would ask that question. If that had been in North Yorkshire and I'd been office for PFCC, obviously I would have made sure that that guy had that firearm taken off him. It posted. The police knew. Misogynist.
Okay, I'm going to bring in James, please. James, would you like to join this conversation?
Yeah, certainly. You know, like Keith with a background in the military, I'm used to firearms, and to me, and probably most other people who use firearms, it's a tool in the box. But I like Keith's point. Let's be vetted. You know, I've had my background vetted on more than one occasion, and to some quite serious levels. But you know, yes, it's a horrific crime, and there's no way you can actually stop it. What you can do is the very best you can to stop people who shouldn't have firearms have them. Oh, sorry, we've just beeped somewhere.
No, keep going. So okay. You're fine. You're fine.
So you know, you'll never stop that one individual who's hell bent on causing mischief, mayhem, and murder. He did it with a firearm. What's to stop them driving down a high street on a Saturday morning and just ploughing people left, right, and centre? Keith's point, yes, vetting. Check. Then ask the question, why? Why do you need a firearm? And I think we'll leave that there.
Okay. Zoe, can I bring you in on this one, please?
Yes, of course. I mean, there are really stringent vetting procedures if you want to get a firearms license. But what I would say is that actually the police do come out and check where these firearms are kept. But I'd like to see more checking, more regular checking. I think that's really important.
So North Yorkshire Police are starting to do online firearms licensing checks. What do you think to that?
I'm a little bit cautious about it. I think I'd like to know more about the approach. For me, it's about actually physical checks to make sure that they're kept safely, used correctly, and I'd like checks more often.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm going to move on to one of the questions in the chat now. And that is about money. People are making a lot of commitments in their comments and assertions. How are you going to pay for it all? I'm going to start, I think, with James.
So yeah, it's tough. Part of my sort of manifesto, and it's all out there on the website, is working smarter, not harder. Let's look where we can work together. Let's look where we can work collaboratively, when I can put my teeth in, and make savings. Can we bring together some backroom functions? And the cash we can free up from that, let's put it back into frontline services. As a Lib Dem organisation, we don't actually believe in the office of the PFCC. We believe that money could be reinvested in a frontline police officers and the fire service, and have the role of the PFCC done by a police fire and crime panel, as it was goodness knows how many years ago. So we're looking to make savings, but these are difficult decisions, and I'm quite prepared to make these difficult decisions. After all, leadership is not a popularity contest, but it's giving value for money back to the people of North Yorkshire. We can arrange, the police precept on the council tax can be altered as required. Why can't we do the same with the fire service to give them the kit and equipment they need? But you can't have a Porsche service if you've only got Skoda money.
So, James, I think if you look at the numbers, the cost of the office of PFCC and that of the fire authority are roughly the same. So that ain't going to save a lot of money. And it's a drop in the ocean in comparison to the overall budget of the police service. So come on, let's have some proper savings plans from you.
Absolutely. Where do we want to start? If you want to make savings, you either raise prices or bill people further, or you save money somewhere else. You can't spend and save. So it's a lovely idea. So actually, as I said, you can't have a Porsche if you've only got a Skoda money. So we need to start looking root and branch about what we have got, where we can make savings, where we can make efficiencies, and take those hard decisions.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Emma now, if I may. Emma.
Yeah, and my sort of leading question would be, what price do we put on somebody's sister, mother, friend, colleague, aunt? And actually, do I want to look somebody in the eyes and say, I'm really sorry, but we couldn't afford, your sister was one that was left behind because we couldn't afford it. It was a price we weren't willing to pay. I don't think that anybody would willingly say that was a conversation that they were happy to have with anybody. So without looking at the books, I'm not going to pull a number from a hat, but James is absolutely right that allowances need to be made, but actually I think that this is priority number one, and we shouldn't be looking to put a price on the safety of women survivors as a whole, not just women but survivors. So yeah.
So what are you going to not spend the money on instead of this? What are you going to cut?
And I don't think it has to be about cuts. I think to take from one element to give to another isn't necessarily the way forward. I do think that there needs to be better allocation of money. I think that we could probably...
From what to what though, Emma? From what to what? You've got to prioritise things. What? That's part of the job. What you going to prioritise?
I'm aware it's part of the job. And we do have to prioritise, women's and girls' safety. I'm not in a position to say now in this conversation, not having the books in front of me, which service or which element of the service I'm willing to take those funds from. So quite frankly, I'm not, like I say, pulling numbers out of hats. I don't have numbers in front of me, but it is something that we need to look at, and we do need to commission an independent report into how we can better allocate money to the services that need it most.
But as PFCC, you're the person whose job it is to allocate that money.
And as PFCC, I would have an office there behind me and the books in front of me, and I would be in a place to make those decisions. But as candidate now on this Zoom, I'm not.
All right, well said. Okay, thank you. Keith, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. My manifesto is based on my background and experience, police officer, but also bank fraud investigator. So I would come in, and clearly my manifesto is simple things which aren't going to actually cost any money. Police officers, instead of driving around in their cars for a full shift, park up, walk around the centre of Ripon where there's antisocial behaviour for 20 minutes, half an hour. The same in Richmond, the same in Selby. So we get the benefits of visible policing, no extra costs involved. I'm very disappointed that North Yorkshire only has 3 electric vehicles on its fleet. The grey fleet, the actual non-operation ones, in this day and age, we should have about 20 to 40% electric non-essential vehicles. The estates where we need clearly solar panels, etc., which are actually feeding the tariff. When we're paying £1.50 a litre as people are at the moment for diesel, you've got to think these costs are going up. So the only way is by actually introducing things which aren't going to cost vast amounts of money or very little, and actually achieving that. And if you say, where are you going to, bring your cuts in? I'd say I would immediately want an independent audit to evaluate how money is actually being spent at this moment in time. So I've got a very clear plan what I'm going to do from the Monday if I'm elected.
Thank you. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I do want to give each of you your chance for your 30 seconds. So I'm just going to go for one more question. We've had this question asked in a number of different ways, and I'm going to paraphrase it. So how are you going to prevent vulnerable young children from being exploited and groomed? If I could first come to Zoe.
Thank you. This is a really serious topic, and I think it's something that we have to work with all outside agencies, so social services, the police. It's about being able to identify these vulnerable children when they're in schools, if they are flagged up by social services, and it's about having a really combined collaborative approach to be able to put the support there, and that's how we can identify these children.
Okay, so I think I probably need a little bit more detail from you on that. What sort of things do you actually want to put in place? How would you hold the Chief Constable to account for delivery on this?
Well, you'd first of all be scrutinising the Chief Constable and what they're doing and how they're tackling this right now, which partner agencies they're working with, how is it working, how is it not working, how are they getting information from cross-border forces, how is it working over there, what can we implement, what new ideas we can implement into the way the police work. And I think that's really important. Intelligence gathering from education, better communication between all the outside agencies.
Okay, thank you. I can see Hannah. I was going to come to you next anyway, Hannah, so go ahead, you're welcome.
Excellent, thank you. So as a GP, I'm very heavily involved in safeguarding and multidisciplinary team and multi-agency working, and I think that's absolutely key. We have to acknowledge that at the moment we are working in a system where every single public service is incredibly overstretched and incredibly under-resourced by our government. We have seen that across the board, and that makes interagency working harder because we are all at beyond capacity. So we need to acknowledge that. Now, from a PFCC perspective, when we look particularly at county lines gangs, which is what I'm sure this is alluding to in some way, we need to look at the actual structures that we have in place. So the Local Government Association has called for every police force to have a violence reduction unit, which help tackle county lines gangs. I'm very much in agreement with that. We have 18 of them in the UK so far. South and West Yorkshire have them. North Yorkshire is one of the biggest counties with a big issue on county lines gangs, does not have one. And I think that's something that we can try and bring in very quickly.
How are you going to get the government to cough up the money for that then, say, because all the others have had millions of pounds?
Yes, well, I think we need to be able to go and hold the government to account and ask why we don't have that and make a big noise about it. I'm quite good at going in and campaigning and getting them to do things. Today, we've heard that they're going to finally start treating violence against women and girls as a form of terrorism. That's taken over 6 months of campaigning by the Women's Equality Party to finally get other parties agreeing to this and get the government to do so. So I think we have the history, we have the knowledge, and I think I'm far better at going in and holding politicians to account than perhaps others who would come from the same party as them.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. James, James, can you just try and keep it quick because I'm conscious of time and I do want to give everybody their 30 seconds.
Surely, again, part of my manifesto is tough on the causes of crime, and we heard it mentioned earlier. So, working with youth groups, social services, the community, let's see what else is out there. Let's see what's causing the crime. But in a nutshell, legislation, money, and partnership. Well aware that legislation is going through at the moment, stopping child marriage. The age of getting married is now being raised to 18, rightly so in my opinion. So we can stop that sort of thing. But it comes back to working with volunteer groups, charities, and education. There we go, in a nutshell.
Thank you, James. Then I'm going to come to Keith and then to Emma. Please just keep it short. I'm sure you want your 30 seconds. Keith.
Children, schools, working with schools quite clearly because we've got problems with county drugs lines. That's in my manifesto also, how to deal with that from the start. Very practical solutions in relation to children, young people. We also need to be working with GPs. For example, in Wales, they use a system called IDAS where the GPs contribute, look out for the signs, get specialist training, and overall the person who can deal for extra money and funding if necessary. I've worked with MPs at all parties throughout my life in my various capacities and independent. I'm the only person who can actually work for
that's your 30 seconds, Keith. Okay, can we come to Emma, please?
Yeah, thank you. Like Hannah said, you know, my role also centres around safeguarding, and I think, you know, as best we can try and prevent things. Unfortunately, we do need to also be empowering children and young and vulnerable people to step forward and realise and recognise that if they are experiencing any form of abuse, that it's not right, and they should know immediately who they can contact in order to put a stop to it and get them to a safer place.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to just first of all say thank you to the audience and to the fantastic questions that the audience has put forward. I couldn't get to them all. Candidates, you can't see those questions, but I think we need to find a way to send you them because there's some excellent questions in there. I'm going to go in reverse order now. So Zoe, can you start with your 30 seconds and then we'll go in reverse order. So Zoe, you're up first, please.
So if you want a strong commissioner that's going to hold your police and your fire service to account and going to commission excellent victim and survivor services and listen to your community, then vote for me on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Keith.
You need a commissioner who is going to be somebody who understands the police. My son's a firefighter, so I understand the fire service as well. You need somebody who isn't a politician. We've had enough of politicians in this role and we've seen what's not been achieved. It's time for change, and it's time for somebody to be elected who is going to represent the people as the commissioner, not the politicians and politics.
Thank you, Keith. James.
Thank you. I've served my country in the military. I've served my community as a City of York councillor. I'm quite prepared to ask those all good questions. You know, voting for me is voting for common sense. I plan to be a thorn in the side of the government and the Chief Constable, asking the whys, whys, and whys. Like I say, I'm not scared of stepping forward and supporting my manifesto. So please vote Barker on Thursday, and it's a vote for common sense.
Thank you, James. Hannah.
So I'm contesting this election because I believe every woman should live free from the threat of fear of violence, and I refuse to settle for anything less. I'm very proud of the fact that my manifesto has a very clear, I would suggest the clearest and most specific plan about how I'm going to end violence against women and girls. I understand what it's like to be a public servant, and I have no issues with holding services to account as and when necessary, and I am independent enough of the forces to do that. So
thank you, Hannah. And finally, Emma.
Yeah, thank you. My sort of final thing to end on is that we do have a huge community, unfortunately, of survivors and victims. And whilst that is unfortunate, we need to be doing them the bare minimum decency and listening to their experiences and hearing how they think we can be better and how we can protect people in the future. That it's the bare minimum we can do for the survivors that we have is to listen to their experiences.
Okay, thank you very much. Carmel, do you want to just come in quickly with your point there?
Sorry, Julie, were you asking for another question, or I was just suggesting the candidates stay on if they can, just so we just wanted to say a big thank you to them all, but thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. So candidates, thank you very much indeed. Members of the public, thank you very much indeed. There's so much more we could have discussed. Thank you for your interaction. Thank you for your questions, and we will call it a day. So thank you very much. But candidates, if you want to stay, happy to do so. And we can just give you a sense of some of the other questions that have come in. Cheers.